And my sense is you kind of got turbocharged on your mission. Is that true?
So I decided to serve a mission. Still hadn't read the Book of Mormon all the way through. I decided that's something that I need to do. So I read the Book of Mormon all the way through. Actually finished it in the MTC. And I was called to serve in the Chile Antofagasta mission. And so I went to the MTC. I had studied Spanish in high school, living in Southern California, had ample opportunities working in restaurants all throughout high school and college to interact with Spanish speakers. So I had some experience with Spanish. So I spent a little bit less time in the MTC, but my mission for me was absolutely transformative. It was the time when the fire was lit within my heart, with respect to my testimony, the church, my desire to live the gospel to the best of my ability.
Talk about your mission president a little bit.
Oh, I loved my mission president.
Oh, you had two.
I had two.
Okay.
When I
Your second one, which was the intense one? Were they both intense, or?
The second one, yeah. So, we about halfway through my mission, we were asked to run. We were asked to run from house to house, from door to door, to go as fast as we could, to meet as many people as we could, to talk to as many people as we could about the gospel and the church, and that's what I did. We ran for about the last year of my mission. We ran from door to door and from appointment to appointment. We didn't have bikes, didn't have cars, so that's how we got around. Yeah,
I don't know if people understand, maybe missionaries will, but, it's intense to always be tracting, but at least you get the chance to leisurely walk between doors or between buildings. I'm trying to imagine, and there was a missionary on my mission in Arizona named Elder Farmer who was just so intense. He was like this farmer from Idaho. Maybe getting his name wrong, but anyway, it didn't matter. He would run from door to door in the hot Arizona sun, because that's for him what it meant to be an excellent missionary. But I can't imagine all missionaries in the mission being asked to run between houses and between doors for their entire mission. Yeah. Well, what was that like? Exhausting, but it was intense. I mean, it's now that I think back, the more you ask of people, the more zealous they become, the more, and not for everybody. That certainly didn't work for everybody, but it did for me. I mean, I felt like the harder I was working, the more tired I was. In Chile, there's the afternoon siesta time where after lunch, and lunch is the big meal, and after lunch, people take naps, stores close down for 2 hours, and there's not much happening. And I remember my companion and I we were in the city of Iquique, and we decided we weren't going to, and we had either an hour and a half or a 2 hour break in the middle of the day. We stayed out later at night, but in the middle of the day we had that break where we were supposed to go back and study our scriptures. Turns out we often studied scriptures until our heads fell into the book and we passed out in the middle of the day because we were already tired. But I remember making the decision, we're not gonna take a break. We're gonna go to lunch, and then we're going to keep working. We're going to work through the siesta, and if people aren't out, we'll go to the next door. And that's how we actually met and taught, and ended up baptizing just a beautiful, wonderful family. All five of them. But so there were tangible blessings from those sacrifices, like going above and beyond what the mission president was asking us to try and accomplish those goals. Shout out to Mark Krigo, who says that he served in Antofagasta, Chile in the mid-'70s, long before it was its own mission. He says driest place on earth.
Driest desert in the world, yeah. Yeah, I remember one day we were out tracting in Antofagasta, and it started to sprinkle, and people were like scurrying, and there was this movement of people everywhere, and we were going, what is going on? So we finally asked somebody, and they said, oh yeah, last time it rained was 6 years ago, and there were just massive mudslides, because there's no vegetation on the hillsides. And so the mud just slides down the mountainside. So every time they get a little bit of rain, that's their main concern, yeah.
Also, shout out to Roger Hendricks, who's watching, who served as a mission president in Chile.
Yeah.
Did you guys have, I'm thinking about my mission,
Guatemala City North was the second highest baptizing mission in the world, next to the Chile Viña del Mar mission.
Yeah.
We covered with an episode with Dr. Ted Lyon many, many years ago how Chile had this baptism problem where they were baptizing kids and people off tombstones, and, missions with hundreds, if not low thousands of baptisms per month, but a massive retention problem that ended up causing the church to close like 30 to 50 stakes in Chile.
Yeah.
And I don't think that the church in Chile has ever really rebounded from those decades of low quality baptisms. Not that the people are low quality, but just the people weren't converted and they fell away as soon as they were joined, but they joined in such large numbers. There were wards with 10 or 20 people and massive inactivity rates all across the country that ended up causing a big collapse. Did you get to see any of that while you were there?
I did see some of the effects of that for sure. I remember early on in my mission, a couple of experiences. One time I was a young missionary, maybe in my second area, and one of the assistants to the president was out doing splits with me and my companion. So I was on splits with one of the APs, and we were teaching somebody. We were just knocking doors, and we got into a home, we sat down, we were teaching these people, just met him, and he challenges them to be baptized. But the way he challenged them to be baptized, he said, have you ever been baptized by immersion like Jesus was? And they said, no. And they said, well, would you like to follow Jesus' example by being baptized? And they said, yes. And then he said, okay, when would you like to do it? And I remember feeling like, wait a second, this is not how it's supposed to work. These people don't know about the Book of Mormon. They don't know about Joseph Smith. They certainly don't have a testimony of him. How can we commit them to be baptized? And unfortunately, and this is the assistant to the president, right? And unfortunately, I didn't have the courage to talk to my mission president about it and ask him why that was happening. But I did promise myself that I would never baptize a person who I didn't feel like at least had manifested to me that they had a testimony of the core doctrines of the church, that I wasn't out here for numbers, that I personally really wanted to help people have a testimony of the church because I believed that would bring them happiness. So that just didn't sit well with me. And I did on occasion run into people, contacting. I would run into people who had been baptized after playing soccer with the missionaries, and who were quite angry in their adult years for what had happened to them when they were a youth. So I did run into that, not a lot, but from time to time. I would say by the time I got to Chile and my mission, much of those problems with the soccer, baseball baptisms, if you will, were no longer around. You heard rumors of missionaries who would go to the cemetery and get data off of tombstones and enter those, but I didn't see much evidence of that currently happening. And we had our mission president was very strict. He raised the standards that people would have to meet to be able to be baptized. They had to go to church an extra week above what the church required, and he really wanted us to baptize families and men and not just children if we could at all avoid it. So anytime we baptized a woman, we had to have express permission of her husband to be baptized, these sorts of things. So I think the effort and the desire was there, but certainly, like you said, the inactivity rate was such a problem. I mean, you had large geographical and numerical wards that were just attendance-wise so small.
Like what? Average attendance at some of these small wards?
Some of these small wards, 30, 40 people, and the rolls
That's a branch.
Yeah, but the rolls are, on the rolls, there's hundreds of members, right?
Yeah.
And so that was, certainly a challenge. Yeah. And I never wanted to contribute to that. I sincerely believe that most of us missionaries who were there at that time didn't want to contribute to that we were, at least in my experience, almost all the missionaries that I came in contact with or served with, we were on that same page of wanting to really do good and help strengthen the church and not just baptize.
Yeah. So if you had to describe kind of what the mission did to you and what it meant to you, how would you summarize it?
I would say coming home from my mission, I was a changed person. And that's the best way I can describe it. I went out with a good desire, but not a very strong testimony, and I came home, in my opinion, the strongest and most important convert of my mission. And in my heart, I was convinced that the church and the plan of salvation and the gospel as set forth by the LDS Church was the one and only way to eternal happiness, the one and only way to get back to Heavenly Father with my family. So there was no doubt in my heart.
Right. And even now, I see you getting a little misty-eyed about your mission. Is that right?
I have very tender feelings for my mission, you know. The church has given me a lot in my life, and my mission is one of those things that gave me a lot. It taught me a lot about myself. It taught me a lot about people. I learned to love. I learned to serve in ways that I had never had opportunity to do. And that for me was really transformative. And I firmly believe that in so many ways, myself and our family are still reaping the benefits of those lessons that I learned and that were taught to me on my mission.
Did your mission president give you any instruction about getting married?
Hit the ground running. That's what he said. I don't recall specific instruction about marriage, but that was hit the ground running was it was a universal hit the ground running in every sense. You know, get back to school, start dating, get on with life. So yeah. Okay. I loved my mission so much. I extended. You know, I didn't want to go home. I asked to stay longer, and he was gracious to grant me more time serving, and so I loved it.
And he was the AP on his mission.
Yeah.
And they flew on a plane, right?
Yeah, so my mission was about the size of California geographically. So when we traveled, we had to travel by plane with the president.
That's fancy.
Yeah.
All right. So what was life like once you got home, and take us up to the point where you meet Leah?
Okay. So I came home. Now I had finished, I might have misspoken earlier, I had finished 3 years of college actually before I left on my mission. And so I came home, and all of my friends from college had since graduated and moved on. And so I still had a year left back up at Pepperdine. I came home in the summer, which was just hard, you know, coming home from your mission and having to adjust. And I was bored and didn't have enough time to get a job before I had to go back to school. So I waited out those weeks and then headed back to Malibu. Was able to find an apartment off campus with a couple of friends, and one of them was LDS, one was not. And so we lived actually in Brentwood, California, which was really fun. And I commuted into Pepperdine for that last year. And while I was in Brentwood, that's when I was attending the Los Angeles First Ward, which is one of the singles wards in LA. We met right there at the temple grounds. There's a chapel right on the back of the Los Angeles temple grounds. And so yeah, my first Sunday back, they have a new member meeting after the block. And so I went to that meeting to meet the bishopric, and I don't know, there were probably a dozen of us, maybe more, that were in that meeting, the new members of the ward, and I met Leah Lewis for the first time.
That's your maiden name?
At that meeting, yeah.
Lewis. Well, that's my dad's. Yeah, I took my dad's name. My mom's Woolley, but yeah.
Okay. I'm just going to read a few comments, just because we've got several comments from our listeners about missions. Stevie writes, the same kind of thing went on in Brazil. Challenge and commit no matter what. Shake my head. That's from Stevie. Angela writes, I was a missionary in Hawaii. We were told to challenge them to baptism on the doorstep. Steve writes, I served in Anaheim. We were told to challenge people to be baptized at first contact and not spend a lot of time with people who weren't ready to commit to baptism in the first few minutes, he writes. Oh my gosh. Jenny writes, my uncle was accused of stealing by his mission president and then dishonorably sent home because he refused to play this horrible baptize whoever you can game. He pretty much left the church at that point and never looked back. Thanks for sharing, Jenny. So sorry to hear about your uncle. Mark Krigo writes, hey, Mark, it was in the mid-'70s during my mission under Bradford that there was a phenomenal push to just baptize. We were required to baptize at least 10 people per month per companionship to meet goals. We often did whatever it took to bring in the numbers. This involved a lot of manipulation, and at the time, there wasn't a strong requirement to actually attend church. We did not falsify numbers, look at tombstones or stuff like that, but I can tell you that most of the top baptizing missionaries, converts, weren't seen more than a few weeks after they were baptized. So yeah, this is something we've covered before on Mormon Stories, and it's something that I think the church is suffering for now. If you look at Latin America today, Latin America used to be sort of like a really strong growth area for the church, and I think that the market has become a bit saturated, and you're seeing places like Mexico shrink and collapse wards and stakes for the first time. And I think Brazil and other South American countries are starting to pay the penalty very heavily for these aggressive baptism practices that have been going on for at least since the early 60s, since the baseball baptism stuff that's covered in sunstone. Okay. So let's jump to your love story. So who wants to talk about the love? Go for it.
So yeah, we met in the Los Angeles singles ward. I mean, we'll just kind of go briefly over this part. We had a short engagement. We both kind of felt prompted in different ways that, you know, we should get married. I mean, I don't know how in depth you want to go into this, but basically from the time we met to the time we got married.
We met in August. We were engaged the next summer.
But we didn't start dating in August because it wasn't until I got back from New York.
Yeah. We started dating in the spring.
We dated in the spring. We got engaged in August.
July.
Okay. Well, I think you should do this part.
Got engaged in July and married in November. So,
typical Mormon.
At that time, I was in my last year of college, and Leah was out in Los Angeles working as a doula. And we were friends and acquaintances for the first 7 or so months that we knew each other. And I actually was preparing to leave after college. I was going to move back to Utah. I was going to take an internship up in Utah doing medical research to try and prepare for medicine. And so I was planning to leave, and shortly before then, in April or so, we started dating. So when I graduated, it was, we were going to say goodbye, and I was going to leave to Utah. And I had this feeling that I should stay, that I should see where this relationship would go. And I wanted to see what possibility there was. And so I expressed that to Leah. Of course, at that time, my lease was up and I didn't have a place to stay. And
it was right before he was going to move.
I was just maybe a week or two before I was going to leave that I made this decision to not take the internship, but to stay in Los Angeles and be with her. And so I found a different place to live and stayed, and we dated and ended up getting engaged and married in November.
So Cody,
2001.
what did you love about Leah? What were the things you loved and that drew you to her, not just in terms of your feelings for her, but also as a prospective wife and mother of your children?
Yeah. Well, I think that anybody who's listened to this point in the interview can tell what a strong individual Leah is, how passionate she is. She is passionate about relationships, and she's passionate about being a good mother and a good spouse. And I could tell that early on. I knew she was going to be a fantastic mother to her children someday. And she was clearly driven. She had her own business. I mean, as a teenager, she had left college, moved across the country and to other parts of the country, helping women give birth when she'd never given birth herself. She was clearly motivated and driven and confident. and she was faithful. She was in church every Sunday. Just a devoted individual and lovely as a person, just in every way, personality, in every way. She just she had my heart.
You're getting misty-eyed again. What's that about? All right, Leah, and how about you? What'd you love about Cody?
Well, Cody was very humble, and that was really attractive. He was driven, but sort of no one would maybe know it unless they took the time to get to know him. I remember once we were, it was maybe after his graduation. I did attend his graduation. We weren't necessarily dating at the time, maybe in the beginning of our dating. Mm-hmm. And I was at his house in San Diego later, and like was going through a box, and no, it was, I can't remember, but I just seeing all these awards he had received, and like he'd never told me about any of these things, and just he was just a very kind, patient, compassionate, quietly driven, like very unassuming, very sort of almost
modest.
Very.
You wanted that? You liked that?
Yeah, I thought it was, I mean, that was attractive to me, like you don't need to kind of put it all out there. He had nothing to prove, but yet he was super devoted to the church. And that was attractive to me because growing up in the environment that I did with my sort of background, I wanted to write a new story. That was so important to me. Like I never wanted my kids to feel some of the ways I had felt. And I wanted, even though I'd never necessarily been taught by my mom, like check the boxes, I'd been taught by my Mormon culture to check the boxes, and I wanted to check the boxes. I knew that I would marry a return missionary. I knew that I would get married in the temple, and I knew that Cody was very strong and very committed to the gospel. And that was really, really important to me. And so, yeah, those were some of the things. And he was always just lovely about his family and kind about his mother. And my mom always said, marry somebody who's kind to their mother.
And Cody was kind to his mom?
Yeah, Cody was kind to everyone. Everybody.
Okay, so when a Mormon couple gets married, especially an Orthodox Mormon couple, I guess I'm imagining there are explicit and unexplicit terms of the marriage. And this is going to come in later as we talk about your faith crisis and your marriage. But I think it'd be fun to just talk about what do you both imagine were the explicit and the inexplicit pillars or foundations or understandings of what getting married meant in terms of behavior and belief and roles, etc.
Wow,
do you understand the question?
So it's hard to remember back that far to know exactly what I understood as explicit and just understood pillars. I certainly there was the understanding that I would work and earn for our family, and that I would be committed to do so in a way that she wouldn't have to do that, and that she could be home, and that she wouldn't have to do what her mom did and be a providing mother. And so that was certainly an understood, I don't know if we ever had that specific conversation, but it was understood that that's the way it would go. That we would have children. That was certainly a part of the agreement. The exact number I don't think was in the initial days part of that agreement, but and that the gospel would be a foundation upon which we would build our home and our family, and that we would raise our kids in the church. We would do our best to be faithful, to provide that gospel example for them, such that they would be inspired to pursue the gospel in their lives and in their children, and to pass it on to their children. So certainly those, as I recall, were absolute mutual understandings that we had.
And how about you, Leah?
Yeah, I think those are the most important things, right? Because it's like, well, if we have that, then everything's going to work out. So I felt like we had the most important things. Maybe we'd only known each other for a couple of months, but He checked the boxes, and he was a great man, but truth be told, if he hadn't served a mission, we wouldn't have been married, you know? So it's like, he could have been a great guy, but if he was not a devout, believing, returned missionary, we wouldn't have been married. So, I mean, that's why I say you check the boxes.
Yeah.
And Cody was, I mean, it's so interesting to hear him talk about how he wasn't even attending church for a time, because that is not the Cody that I knew. No.
The Cody you knew?
The Cody I knew attended church on vacation in Hawaii. The Cody I knew on our honeymoon did not want to spend any money or eat anywhere on Sunday in Hawaii. The Cody I knew was, it is black and white, right and wrong, there's good and bad, and gray was not much a part of the Cody I knew, you know.
So I see this a lot where there's an individual who comes from a broken home where maybe there's some gospel related trauma, or a mixed faith couple where their parents were mixed faith, or, you know, there was turmoil in the home. And not only is the church a source of comfort and strength for them, but when they get married and kind of make their plan for their life, they're not going to end up like their parents.
Right.
And so the way they live the gospel is this really strict, committed, devout brand of extra turbocharged Mormonism, because I'm not going to get divorced. I'm not going to have my kids go through what I went through. I'm not going to ever cheat. I'm not going to ever be this unfaithful. And so I'm going to be as super Mormon as Mormons are. I'm going to turbocharge that. Do you think either of you maybe were motivated by your broken homes and your suboptimal, non-idyllic Mormon upbringings, where you're going to do it right and you're going to bring an extra intensity to it?
Yeah.
I don't mean to project on you.
No, absolutely. I think our religiosity, our devotion to the gospel was, in my opinion, an insurance against divorce, right? Like, that was the way neither of us wanted to head down the road of divorce ever. And so the best way to prevent that was to, be as faithful together as we could in the gospel and follow the plan, follow the blueprint.
Yeah, and I think from the beginning of starting our family, starting our life, we're intentional people, and parenting well was always so important to me. So a big part of that plan really was the gospel, right? It was such a fundamental part of our plan to do the very, very best we could do to never have our children experience some of the things that we did or have some of the same pains. Like, we just wanted to write a new story for our posterity that could be improved upon what we experienced. And I think we all want to do that, right? No matter what we grow up in. You could grow up in a picturesque family from the outside, and there's still problems, there's still wounds. You always want to climb the ladder one step higher. But I think because of some of the pain that we experienced, we were just so committed to that. And so the church and the gospel was just such an important part of that plan for us.
So when you talk about that time in Hawaii, where it's Sunday and, you have the option, you're on honeymoon in Hawaii, you have the option on a Sunday of going out to eat, of spending money. I'm thinking about what I know about your story, that on the one hand, everything that you said is true. It was super Mormon all the way. On the other hand, you weren't raised with your mother having a man kind of tell her what she should and shouldn't do. And maybe you would sometimes differ from Cody in how the gospel would be applied, but now you were living under a patriarchal order. I'm wondering what that was like in terms of how you felt about that, and what type of adjustments and what types of frustrations you met from the very beginning in that regard. Does that make sense, my question?
Yeah, it totally does. And that, yes.
Talk about that.
So there's a few pivotal times, in our marriage where there's a rumble there, you know, because it was almost like, well, wait a minute. Like I want to be devoted, but I just didn't think that it looked like that. You know what I mean? So it's like our hearts were the same, but what that looked like for him and I, sometimes was different. So we were on our honeymoon and it's Sunday and it's like, you know, we're in a hotel and like, of course we're going to go eat food on Sunday. Right. But like, that wasn't his plan. And I got to a point where I'm like, I really need to eat food. I'm really hungry, you know? And I just remember eating food and at a restaurant and I just felt so much guilt. And he's like, well, you know, it's okay. You know, we're going to do it because, I mean, bless his heart. He was just trying to be faithful, but
oh yeah,
you know, we're going to do this time because I know you're not feeling well and I know you need to eat food. But I just remember being like, what? But before I forget, we should talk about going through the temple for the first time before we got married. But
talk about that.
Yeah. So, well, you know, you grow up your whole life and you're told like it's amazing and it's wonderful. And we would have lessons on the lawn of the temple because we could walk there from the church or drive, you know, for our lesson time. And we would sit on the grounds of the temple. I remember such a pivotal, like looking at the temple and being taught and just like, I can't wait to go in. Like, I'm going to write a new story and I'm going to be so devoted and I'm going to go to the temple and it's going to be this amazing experience. And that's what you're taught your whole life. And, you know, when you're getting married, there's a lot going on. And we lived in Los Angeles. We were getting married in Utah. So I'm like trying to plan a wedding from Los Angeles in Utah. It's just a very stressful time. And so we went through the temple the day before.
2 days before.
Maybe 2 days before. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, it's almost like you start feeling bad, you know, because it's like, okay, well, my mom's doing this. His stepmom's doing this. He's been doing this for like 2.5 years.
Going through the temple.
Yeah.
And you were feeling bad about what?
It was just very uncomfortable.
What was?
Everything.
About the temple.
Yeah. Just like, it was so different. It's so different. It's so new. I mean.
Can you talk about, or are you trying to not talk about
Well,
details?
I mean, I want to be safe, right? But yeah, I mean, some of the very patriarchal themes, you know, that were uncomfortable to me, that I know, and we could talk about why I think those have been changed later. But at the time, you know, thinking about my mom, you know, and I'm like, wait a minute, like I have to covenant to obey him. Like, how does that feel for women who have an abusive husband or don't have a husband? Like, all these things are going on in my mind, and the clothing, and it was just feeling very uncomfortable to me. But I couldn't really talk to anybody about that because they were all acting like this is the best thing in the world, right? And I've been taught my whole life it's the best thing in the world. So what it does is I felt like it was, and it was sort of the beginning of several experiences of me feeling like, well, I'm the one who lacks faith. Or like, some of this doesn't make sense. Actually, I'm feeling way more confused now that I've gone through the temple than I was before. It just felt like, it didn't even feel like Mormonism. It just felt like foreign. And then you're getting married in 2 days. And I remember standing outside just feeling nauseous and just like, this is just weird, you know, but I guess everybody else is doing it. And I just feel a little more confused and I feel uncomfortable, but I guess in time, when I become more righteous or more understanding of the scriptures maybe, or more in tune with the Spirit than I am now, then it'll feel good. It'll feel right then. It's just me right now, it doesn't feel right because I'm not maybe spiritually where I need to be. And that sort of began a little bit of a theme, right? And in that, you know, I'm sitting there and we're having that meal and I'm feeling so guilty, but I'm also feeling like, well, wait a minute, you know, but maybe it's me, and maybe I just need to have more faith or more desire to do the right thing, you know. But as I kind of grew into myself a little more in the marriage, and that was not an overriding theme in our marriage. There were a couple of things, right? There were a couple of things throughout our marriage where it was like, whoa, like this seems a little extreme, or, oh, this feels uncomfortable to me, or, wow, I'm feeling less than because maybe I don't understand this and that's why I don't feel the same way as you do. I wouldn't say it was an overriding theme, but there were some of those instances. There was one time where I was singing this lullaby I grew up with to my daughter, just to sort of explain where Cody was at. And it said, it was this I See the Moon song, and it referred to God a few times in the song. And it was very offensive to Cody because he felt like it was vain repetition. And he didn't want me to sing it in our home. And it was so painful for me because it was a song I grew up with. And, we never really were people who went into the bishop ever, but we went into the bishop over that song because I was like, no, like, this is wrong. Like, I can sing this song. It's talking about God loving the children. Like,
how does the song go?
Well, the part that bothered Cody was the part that went, so it went like this. So God bless the moon and God bless me and God bless the one I love. And that was sort of the end of the song. And it said God 3 times. And that was vain repetition. So he refused to ever sing it. It was
that's like right out of Joseph Fielding McConkie, like Doctrines of Salvation, right?
So as a missionary, my mission president taught us that that using the Lord's name repeatedly when we pray is vain repetition. And so I said, okay. Mm-hmm. And so
you were intense, Cody.
So clearly I missed the mark at times. Clearly.
No, I'm not attacking you.
No, I know you're not.
It came out of this sweet desire to be righteous. So
I'm just trying to do the best I can. I'm absolutely, like, if my missionary president says, hey, this is the best way to do it, well, I'm going to try and do that the best I can. And again, at times, totally missed the mark and was unkind to Leah. But not intentionally, just because I feel like I was trying to do what was right.
Well, you got to please God. I mean, God rules, right?
That's right.
Yes. Above
you
all.
were just trying to be faithful to your Heavenly Father.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so regrettable. I look back on it with such embarrassment now, that I had those thoughts, or that I acted in those ways, or that when we come out of the temple after she's, received her, and it's just the temple experience is, like she said, it's so unlike anything you've experienced in Mormonism up to that point. And here she is 2 days from getting married, right? What kind of a position is she in when she's asked if she wants to continue? If she chooses not to continue with the endowment, the wedding that's scheduled in 2 days, what happens, right? In the temple.
Did you have that urge to bail when they give you a chance to bail?
No, I didn't have that urge. It was just that, how could I have?
Yeah, it's not really a voluntary choice. I mean, it's quite a pressure situation for a lot of people, not everybody, but that was her situation. And we come out of the temple and I see I'm like, and she's,
for the listening audience, you were like, what?
Yeah, I was just like,
did you love
it? How was it? Like, isn't this great? And she's just like tears, just like.
So you were sobbing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was so hard.
Because it felt, summarize it.
So uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And your response was?
So unsympathetic.
What was his response? How do you remember it?
I just remember I don't remember exactly his response because I was just like in my own world,
But I'm scared. I'm scared because I see that she doesn't love it. And so I'm wondering, well, wait a second. What's going on? Is her testimony not what it should be? Is she doubting? Here we're getting married in the temple. Is this what's going on? So I'm actually, I could never express at the time, but now looking back, I'm somewhat afraid, like that this isn't going the way I thought it was going to go, or the way God said it should go, or the way the plan is supposed to happen. She's supposed to come out of the temple beaming, and it's the best experience she's ever had. When the reality is, if I'm honest, and I look back to when I was, getting ready to go on my mission and took out my endowments, I explicitly remember sitting there with my family in the endowment room thinking, what is going on? Like, this is like unlike anything I've ever experienced, very, very ritualistic. Mormon worship, Sunday Mormon worship is not all that ritualistic. If you go to a Catholic Mass, it's much more ritualistic than a Mormon sacrament meeting, right? And so then to go into the temple, the most holy experience you're going to have, that's so wonderful, and to have those feelings, it's hard. It's really hard, and it was unkind of me to not be able to remember that, and to, and it was a pressure situation with the wedding coming up, of course, but. Yeah.
And Leah, what was it like from your perspective to feel his concern?
I think that day I was unaware of his concern.
You were just flooded.
I would say in our marriage, I did sense that at times, and more increasingly towards the end, towards the discovery, if you will. I felt like Cody really, really, really wanted to do the right thing all the time. And so it came from that place. It became a little more problematic over the years, especially as I stepped into my business, right?
And we'll talk about that in a second.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just read a few comments because you really touched a nerve with our listeners. Allison wrote, as you were sharing your temple experience, Allison wrote, "It is uncomfortable to say the least." Christy writes, "It's not knowing what you are promising until you are doing it. Just make promises. How is that comfortable?" She writes. Rachel writes, "I was so unhappy my first time, the day before I got married in DC, and I was literally angry afterward, and my parents had to try to calm me down." Kimberly writes, "Institutional and cultural shaming leading to internalized guilt." This is what I'm hearing from her, meaning you. Heidi Nielsen Packard. Hey, Heidi. She and her husband, Josh, did an amazing episode, Mormon Faith Crisis episode. So did Kimberly, by the way. Kimberly's amazing too. Heidi writes, "I can so relate to your temple experience, Leah." Amy writes, "Thank you for describing your first temple visit. This is how I felt when I watched the New Name Noah videos and why I didn't want to get endowed in the first place and haven't." So Amy's watching of New Name Noah videos on YouTube kept her from even getting endowed. That's interesting. Jamie writes, "Felt the same about the temple. I must not have enough faith to know the mysteries of God." So it made her feel bad. Angie, my husband, and I can so relate to Leah's first temple experience so much. We never got past it. And there are just many, many people sharing that same experience. And this is so poignant because in 2019, January, we just learned as Mormons last week that they've made yet another round of very radical changes to the Mormon temple ceremony. Now, you guys, as awful as your experience was, I went through in 88 when you did the penalties, and you would use hand motions to show different ways that you would
Kill yourself.
Be killed if you ever, revealed the signs and tokens. And so it was extremely barbaric and violent. But then by 1990, they had removed that. So that was a big round of changes. You guys came after that. Since then, they've made changes where they sewed up the sides of the shield in the initiatories so you weren't touched in naked ways. And they've made other changes. And then last week, they make these really significant changes where they took out apparently a lot of the stuff where the women have to veil their faces, where the women covenants to the husband and the husband covenants to Heavenly Father. Now Eve apparently has more speaking parts than even Satan. Before, Eve spoke less than Satan. And they've listened.
Yeah, the returning and reporting thing is different. Yeah, there's several changes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess I don't want to interrupt your story by talking about our reflections, but man, it's taken the church a long time to make those changes, but they have. Future couples won't be experiencing some of the inequity, feminist sort of gender role concerns that you guys would have faced. And I just have to just make that a note because we're in the middle of history being made, as Russell M. Nelson tells us to take our vitamins and turbocharges change in the church. The church is listening.
I wonder how Joseph would feel about that, because he did say that the temple endowment can never be changed, but
we'll get to that.
Yeah.
Okay, so all right, so what else about your early years do you want to share? You shared the mission experience, you shared the experience about the Sabbath in Hawaii. Anything you guys want to share about having those young kids and med school and what it was like to be a Mormon in those early years of your marriage?
Well, Cody was very busy. We had 4 kids during medical school and residency, and that was a lot. One with special needs, as you mentioned, who was in casts and having surgery and having leg bracing. And so in addition to working insane hours, I mean, when he was in medical school, again, he never studied on Sunday, never. And he held callings, like you were the ward mission leader. And, he had some callings that were a little bit, not too intense, but, you needed to work on those as much as possible. So he would sometimes be up studying till like 3 or 4 a.m. on Sunday, so that he didn't have to study on Sunday. Because he made a commitment that he would never, ever study on Sunday in medical school, and he did it.
That would seem like a huge disadvantage relative to the other students. You would think, was it?
Well, that's not how I saw it. Yeah. I mean, I did well enough. But yeah, I mean, if you have an exam on Monday, everybody else is studying Sunday evening.
Cramming, right?
Yeah.
And you've got to cram Saturday night into Sunday
studying
morning.
Saturday night, but then I'm keeping the Sabbath day the best I felt like I could, and I felt like I'd be blessed for that. And I mean, yeah, that was my reasoning.
But he never studied on Sunday. But he was also busy a lot on Sunday with church. Yeah. And so it was just it's been a busy life, and at times that's between me starting my business and I started to see things a little bit differently, right? I started to see the patriarchy more. I started to, there's sort of like over the years, I can look back and see that there was a bit of an evolution, right? But I was still all in, like couldn't even fathom, like John, I had no idea that anything that I've learned existed, literally. Mm-hmm. So like while things became uncomfortable and difficult, while I saw, wait a minute, like, this is okay for a man, but like, it's actually not okay for a woman, even in our marriage. Like, you can work every Sunday if you're on call, and I will go to church alone with the kids. But the second that I have something, to support a friend on a Sunday, maybe it's not okay, right?
Okay, so you started doing exercise. So you had a part-time job the early years of your marriage doing what?
Yeah, I was a fitness instructor for 16 years, starting when I was pregnant with Brinley up until about a year and a half ago.
Was that yoga? What was that like?
I taught over almost 40 different formats over the years in every
Name
different
4.
Kickboxing, body pump, bar, Pilates, yoga. I mean, I taught classes on a trampoline. I taught, you name it, anything but except for dance. I didn't teach dancing. So I was doing that, and he was always very supportive of that. And it was never on a Sunday, which worked out really well. There would be like a mandatory training once a year, and that was always a difficult thing in our marriage, because once a year I would have to go to a mandatory training on a Sunday, and that was...
What was that like?
Hard.
Why?
We fought over it most of the time. Yeah.
So you're fighting why? Because if you had a medical residency thing on a Sunday, you had to go, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No problem.
And there was no question. There was no fighting. You would work on Sunday for the medical training.
And not that I'm proud of this line of reasoning, but my line of reasoning was, there are certain jobs that the firefighters and the police officers and the doctors and the nurses, they have, we can't close the hospitals on Sundays. But we don't have to keep the gyms open on Sundays, sort of a thing. And
so it's not essential.
It's not essential. And I told Leah this several times, and I meant it. And it was that, listen, if we didn't have kids, it'd be one thing, but we have kids and we have to set the example for them. and I want them to respect the Sabbath day. And so,
But this was a mandatory training once a year that I actually had to do in order to keep my certification. So this wasn't teaching. This was actually, I had to get my credits. So it was one time a year, and it was a whole weekend.
And how did it feel to feel like there was kind of this double standard? What was that like for you, and what were those fights like?
Well, I could never win. I could never win because he had the prophet and the scriptures and God. And not trying to make him feel bad. Like, he was really trying to do the right thing.
It's not Cody. It's the system you were a part of.
It's the system. And
you were being faithful to the system.
he felt like he was being faithful to the system. What happened in a number of ways over time was when he would become more faithful to the system and he couldn't hear me, it started to become deeply painful. Because I was like, I would feel at times like I didn't have a voice. And I would say, Cody, every time you go away for conferences or you're on call still, I mean, you work 12-hour days still. You work weekends. I'm always here taking care of everything. And that we're having this conversation when one time a year, I have a mandatory training. Like, it just felt so suffocating at times. It felt so suffocating. And the degree of fervor and rightness that Cody felt in those conversations, like, I just didn't have it. Why talk at times? Why talk? Because you have it all figured out. You can point me to the scriptures that tell me I'm wrong, and the prophet that tells me I'm wrong, and yet you go and you work all the time, and I do all of the heavy lifting with the kids. So it would feel at times very suffocating.
And why were you working at all? I could even see him going back to an Ezra Taft Benson talk that says the woman's place is in the home. Why were you even working at all?
Well, I think that he always really supported me, and he always felt like it was really healthy that I had something that I was focused on and working towards and a skill that I was developing. But see, it didn't, I would bring the children to the gym, right? And it would just be, I'd be teaching a few classes every week, 3, 4, 5. But it didn't interfere in any way with I never had to get help with the kids. I was earning some income, albeit very small, but when we had no money throughout residency and medical school, it was helpful. And it wasn't like I'd go in and teach a class. Like, I would always say, well, I can either go to a fitness club and pay for it, or I can go and teach and make money doing it. You know what I mean? So it sort of fit in with my life. It wasn't like I was working a part-time job. It didn't feel like that. I was teaching fitness classes, so I think, and he always very much supported me in that and was very encouraging of that and was really wonderful, except for when it came to anything on Sunday.
Nicole Wagner's joined us, and she says, I feel your pain.
Hi, Nicole. We're going to talk about you in a minute.
So, Cody, really quickly, I saw, maybe I just projected, but I perceived you feeling a little bit uncomfortable, maybe a tiny bit defensive at some point, maybe a little bit guilty or ashamed. Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk about what you were feeling?
Well, it's interesting because I can see with new lenses, if you will. You know, I see these situations in a way that, like I mentioned, I feel ashamed at times for ways that I behaved. And yeah, we can talk about how it was the programming and it was me just trying to be faithful to God, and putting God above family at times. And that was highly valued, right, in the church. And that's what I was trying to do. I would have told you 3 years ago, it's God, then it's family. And
you would have put family after God?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. And to be honest, I don't think that's a fanatical view within the church, John. I don't. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. We could put out a poll.
I recall that it's taught.
But I didn't feel like a zealot for saying, hey, God, to the extent that that's true, towards the end of getting more towards our journey, that begins to shift a bit, right? But for the first 15 years of our marriage, that's how I felt. But I didn't view them as separate things so much, right? There were times when I felt like I had to make a choice. But the beautiful thing of our marriage, at least for those 15 plus years, was I didn't have to make that choice very often. And it didn't feel like it was over very significant things. I felt like our paths were very aligned. Our goals and the direction we wanted to go were very well aligned. I felt like we were a great match and a good team. Mm-hmm. There were just these speed bumps. There were these pain points along the way where, it would flare up. And we were, life in medical school and residency with kids, young kids, for a myriad of reasons was such a challenge for each of us in different ways. And for literally 10 years of our marriage, the first 10 years of our marriage, we were like, we talked about it in the past, is like we were both living sort of parallel, very difficult journeys. And I couldn't really understand what she was going through. She couldn't really understand what I was going through. And there was little time to sit and talk and little energy, because by the time we got the kids to bed at night, it's like you're both exhausted for different reasons, right? Mm-hmm. And so the connection, I think, was a little bit difficult at times, and that was a challenge. But going back to your question, yeah, I mean, I miss the mark at times, and I feel embarrassed by that. But I can sit here and she can say, I felt like I didn't have a voice, and I can see that. I can see, I understand why you felt that way. At the time, I would have never vocalized that. I would have never said, how can you say you don't have a voice? You're sitting here telling me how you feel. It's just that you're wrong,
I hear words coming out of your mouth, so you must have a voice.
But she felt in a sense powerless, because I could play at times the trump card, which was God, which was the scriptures, which was, well, President Monson said that, Elder Christensen, he played for the Oxford basketball team, and the championship was on Sunday, and he didn't play. So the prophet's endorsing us to not even play in the championship basketball game on Sundays. So yeah, I don't think it's appropriate, this, that, and the other. So, I mean,
what does that do to marital intimacy, to have a patriarchy where the husband is kind of the rule interpreter and enforcer, and the woman has to kind of like argue but then submit? Do you have a way to even, because you're only a year into a new faith perspective, this is kind of all you've known, just like growing up in Provo, that's all you knew. In some sense, you kind of only knew the patriarchy, but do you have any perspective on how that affects marital, emotional, and even physical intimacy, or does it not? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'll let Leah answer, but the one thing I would say is you have to put in perspective of the entire relationship. Certainly it's damaging. To the extent that it's damaging, I guess, is determined by how frequently it comes up in the marriage and in the relationship. But I would say it's generally not healthy.
Yeah, I would say it's not healthy. There is a wedge that can be put in between you and your spouse when you feel like on any topic, whatever it is, that it's not safe. Your feelings can't be seen. If you do share feelings, then they might be wrong, or you might be labeled in certain ways. I think that can happen in religion. It can happen in a variety of different ways. But, as I look back, I can see, and we'll talk about this, but I can see where that escalated significantly. I would say towards the end of our time in the church, there was definitely certain things that made that experience get to the point where I didn't know how we were going to get through at times.